Okay, I need everyone to turn in their Chapter 9 packet to page 52. We're going to go over example 5. Now, this is the second half of 9.8, and it's really not anything new. It emphasizes always taking out the GCF. So this is just going to be an example of a lot of problems that have a GCF. So if we look at example 5, and it wants us to solve this. So the first thing I think is, well, to apply the zero product property rule, I have to get everything on one side and make it equal to 0. So I'm going to add 30x and set it equal to 0. Now, I also notice that everything is divisible by 5. Now, I notice it's actually divisible by 5x, but we are not allowed to divide by a variable, and I will show you why. First of all, let's suppose I divided everything by 5x. I would get I would end up with x squared minus 5 plus 6 equals 0. This would be x minus 3 times x minus 2 equals 0, and x would equal 3 comma 2. But in fact, that's wrong, because this was 5x cubed. We know there's going to be 3 answers. There's always going to be the same number of answers as the largest power. Sometimes the same answer may occur twice, but there's not just going to be 2 answers. So we lost an answer because we divided by an x. Now, x could be 0, which is the reason you can't divide by x. So let's try this again. And I'm going to divide everything by 5. So I get x cubed minus 5x squared. Let's pretend that I brought that over, plus 6x equals 0. Now I'm going to factor out an x. And now I'm going to factor my trinomial. And now either x equals 0, x equals 3, or x equals 2. And now I got 3 answers. So the number one thing I want you to remember here is you cannot divide by x. You can divide by any number, but you must factor out an x. Okay? So let's turn to page 53. And this is a crazy word problem. And this says a crate in the shape of a rectangular prism has a volume of 180 cubic feet. The crate has a width of w, length of 9 minus w, and a height of w plus 4. And they want us to find the crate's dimensions. So, to do this, you need to know that volume equals length times width times height. So where it says volume equals, you can go ahead and fill in length times width times height. In this case, it tells us the volume is 180, the length is 9 minus w, the width is w, and the height is w plus 4. Okay? So now, all I have to do is multiply this. So 180 equals 9w minus w squared. And now I FOIL. And I get 9w squared plus 36w minus w cubed minus 4w squared. Okay? And now I have to set everything equal to 0. Right? Combine my like terms and set everything equal to 0. So, over here I have a 4w squared that you can't really see. So the first thing I'm going to do is subtract 180. Well, actually, because, yeah, I'll subtract 180. So I get negative w cubed. I'm now going to put this in descending order. 9w squared minus 4w squared is plus 5w squared plus 36w minus 180. Okay? Now, I'm going to factor by grouping. Group that, group that. I take out a negative w squared. That leaves me with w minus 5. And I take out a 36, and that leaves me with w minus 5. So now I have 0 equals, and I have negative, well, I'll write it as 36 minus w squared times w minus 5. Now, why did I write it like that? I wrote it like that so I'd have the difference of squares, because now I know I can factor this as the difference of squares. So that's 6 minus w, 6 plus w, and w minus 5. Now, when I solve this, I get w equals 6, or w equals 5, or w equals negative 6, which I cross out because a negative dimension is not possible. Okay, so the key here is, first you FOIL, then you subtract 180. So you can never try to factor it unless you have 0 on one side. So a common mistake is people go back to factoring this before they subtract the 180. Okay, so I'll give you a few minutes to make sure you have that all copied. But w equals 6 and 5, and the answers are on Google Classroom. So now let's look at the Chem point. This says, number 1 says, solve 5n cubed minus 30n squared plus 40n equals 0. So how many answers am I expecting? I'm expecting 3 answers. How do I know? There's a 3. I notice all the terms have an n. They also all have a 5. Can I divide by 5n? I cannot. Can I divide by a 5? Yes, I can. So first I'm going to divide every term by 5. And I'm allowed to do that because it's an equation. If it was just an expression, I'd have to factor out 5. N cubed minus 6n squared plus 8n equals 0. Now I'm going to factor out an n. And now I'm going to factor this. Two numbers that multiply to 8 but add up to negative 6 would be negative 2 and negative 4. So n equals 0, 2, and 4. And notice, because I didn't divide by an n, I got 3 answers. Why was I expecting 3 answers? Because it was 5 cubed. N cubed. Okay, next one. And this says factor completely. Okay, so it's 4 terms. I'm going to factor by grouping. Take out x squared, I get x plus 2y. Here I take out a negative 1, I get x plus 2y. And I'm left with x squared minus 1 times x plus 2y. Now, why is that not factored completely? It's not factored completely because there is the difference of squares. So now I have to do x minus 1, x plus 1, x plus 2y. And that is factored completely. So I want you to turn to page 54, and I want you to try to do 5, 6, 7, and 8. So stop the video and turn it back on after you've completed the next page, 5, 6, 7, and 8. Okay, so number 5, negative 2x cubed plus 6x squared plus 108x. Now, how come I can't divide this by 2? Well, I can't divide by 2 because it's not an equation. So the best I can do is factor out stuff. So I'm going to factor out a negative 2x. I get x squared minus 3x and minus 54. So now I'm looking for 2 numbers that when multiplied give me negative 54 but add up to negative 3. And that's going to be negative 9 and positive 6. So this becomes x minus 9, x plus 6, and now I'm done. Okay, because I can use the shortcut method because the leading coefficient was 1. Number 6, 12y to the 4th minus 75y squared. Again, I can't divide by anything, but I can factor out. I'm going to factor out 3y squared. That leaves me with 4y squared minus 25. Now, am I done? I am not done. Because whenever you see a binomial, you always have to ask yourself, is this the difference of squares? You are never done until you check your binomials and make sure there's no GCF or there's no difference of squares. Those are the only two possibilities. So this is 2y minus 5, 2y plus 5. So remember, when you have a binomial, can you take out a GCF? Is it the difference of squares? Okay. Now, let's look at number 7. Now, number 7 is an equation. Since it's an equation, I'm just going to write it like this. I'm going to set it equal to 0. Now, because it's an equation, I am allowed to divide. I don't just have to factor. So first, I'm going to divide everything by 2. Why am I not dividing by 2x? Because you're not allowed to divide by x, right? So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to factor out an x. So I get x squared plus x minus 40 equals 0. So I look at the number 40, and I have to think of two numbers. Oh, that's supposed to be a 20. Did anybody notice I made a mistake? Because I divided by 2, it's supposed to be a 20. So now I'm looking for two numbers that, when multiplied, add up to multiply to negative 20, but add up to 1. So that's going to be x plus 5 and x minus 4. So now I know I end up with three answers: x equals 0, negative 5, and 4. Why was I expecting three answers? Because it was originally 2x cubed. Remember, always look to see if there's a GCF. If there's an equation, we divide by the number. We can never divide by the variable. Okay, now for this last problem, we know volume equals length times width times height. And here, they're telling you the volume's still 180, but the length is x, the width is x plus 9, and the height is x minus 4. So now, once again, I have to multiply. This becomes x squared plus 9x. And now I have to FOIL. And I FOIL before I bring the 180 over. So that's x cubed minus 4x squared plus 9x squared minus 36x. Now I combine my like terms. Plus 5x squared minus 36x. And I'm going to subtract 180. So now I'm just going to change that to 0. Okay, now I'm going to factor by grouping. Take out an x. That's a cube, sorry. So I take out an x squared. I get x plus 5 minus 36, x plus 5. And I end up with x squared minus 36 times x plus 5. Am I done? I am not, because this is the difference of squares. So I get x minus 6, x plus 6, x plus 5. My only possible answer is 6. Because it cannot be negative 6, cannot be negative 5. So the answer here is 6. And if it asks for the dimensions, then I have to fill it in. So this is 6. 6 plus 9 is 15. 6 minus 4 is 2. So my dimensions are 6 feet by 15 feet by 2 feet. Okay?